How evil is every Mortal Kombat character? It's a simple question, but as you'll learn in today's video, the answer is far from simple. In fact, there are so many evil characters in this series. Shao Kahn, Onaga, Shinnok, Quan Chi, Shang Tsung, and just so many more that I had to develop an entire system to rank them appropriately. I thought it fitting to go through all 80 characters and highlight their many indiscretions, no matter how small, to see where they all rank on this tier list of evil! Just for reference, this documentation of the detestable, oh yeah, will only cover the main video game canon and perhaps some other potentially non-canon material. Instead of the usual S through D or S through F rankings, the tiers are as follows. Never done a bad thing in their life, kinda evil, evil, very evil, and basically the devil. As for criteria, I'm considering things like track record, free will, longevity, and success rate. Some will be of no surprise to you, while others may catch you off guard. But now that you know the deal, let's rank every single Mortal Kombat character based on how evil they are and then figure out who's the most evil. But first... You must like...
And cut!
Ashrah.
We are going to go in alphabetical order, and with that, I do think Ashrah is the perfect character to start with, since she does exemplify good and evil. Ashrah is a literal demon from the Netherrealm who eventually turns good. Although we don't know much about her pre-deception history, we do know that she served Quan Chi for an unknown amount of time. That remained the case until she questioned one of his orders. As a result of that, Quan Chi sent her own sisters to eliminate her before she escapes, ultimately finding a sword designed to slay demons. Ashrah then goes on a quest to slay enough demons so that she can escape the Netherrealm. She succeeds and then continues her mission in Vaeternus, where instead of demons, she slays vile creatures that feed on their prey's blood, otherwise known as vampires. MK1 kind of repeats the same story structure for Ashrah, but obviously it's way more fleshed out. Her motivations mostly remain the same. She has it out for Quan Chi, and for this go-around, she joins the Earthrealm forces. Her story concludes with the tower ending that we presume is canon, where she creates the Order of Light alongside her sister Serena. I'm gonna stick Ashrah in kinda evil, just because of her demonic background and the whole Vaeternian thing.
Baraka!
Moving on to Baraka, we have a lifelong henchman who MK1 redeemed after years of just being a bad guy. A mutant of the Tarkatan race, I think it's fair to say Baraka is more evil than not throughout the series. He served Shao Kahn, Shang Tsung, Quan Chi, and Onaga in the original timeline, fought for the forces of darkness in Armageddon, and remained a henchman basically until MK11. Oh yeah, and he basically kicked off the plot of MK2 when the Tarkatans, led by Baraka, slaughtered the Shaolin. Figured I'd mention that. His position in MKX is somewhat questionable just because it depends on whether you see Kotal or Mileena as the more evil of the two. He sides with Mileena and as a result, perishes. MK11, however, sows the seeds of goodness in Baraka. He aligns himself with Shao Kahn for most of the game, but then flips his allegiance to Katana's side despite Kotal's hatred for the Tarkatans. Then we move on to MK1, which is a complete redemption for Baraka, who was not evil whatsoever. The Tarkatan race as we knew it no longer exists, but it's rather humans that were affected by the Tarkat disease. He aids Earthrealm throughout the majority of the game following his intro, where Shang Tsung is extracting his bone marrow. I feel very evil is a good spot for Baraka because he was a bad guy for let's call it 85-ish% of the series.
Blaze.
Is it weird to say that Blaze basically isn't a villain whatsoever? Just looking at his overall story, Argus and Delia created him for one sole purpose: to test warriors and determine which is worthy of his immeasurable power. He has no stake in the game and doesn't care who defeats him. However, this quest was put in place so that one of Daegon or Taven would defeat him and absorb the power, as designed by Delia and Argus. He does have a little side quest before that point where he guards the egg that would eventually hatch and become Onaga, but he carried out this act against his will. I think you could argue kinda evil on this one just because he is a boss, but he exists solely to be neutral. In fact, his whole purpose is to prevent Armageddon. That's kind of why I've always liked Blaze. He goes against all the conventions of a typical final boss. So I'm just gonna say it, he's never done a bad thing in his life.
For Rai Cho.
Some might take one look at Rai Cho and say sinner, because But in actuality, he's one of the least evil characters across the entire series. Considering he trained Liu Kang before the first MK game, which led to him winning the tournament and saving Earthrealm, that kind of speaks for itself. Upon his official entry into the series, his entire purpose as an Outworld native was to prevent the Deadly Alliance from committing their atrocities. That obviously doesn't unfold as intended, but he later rescues Li Mei from her enslavement to the Dragon Army, and you can't forget that he trained Shujinko, who would eventually go on to save the universe from Onaga. That makes two of Mortal Kombat's finest heroes trained by this, making him not only the furthest thing from evil, but apart from maybe some drunken antics, I think it's safe to say that Rai Cho has never done a bad thing in his life. Although I will say, that's pretty gross.
Oh, that's a stinky one.
Cassie Cage.
I don't have to spend too much time on this next character because apart from a potentially non-canon subplot where she's enslaved to the Blood Code and attends a 21 and over fight club, Cassie Cage is pure good. She fights on the side of Earthrealm throughout MKX and ends up defeating Shinnok, which only a few characters in-universe can say they've done. She's equally good in MK11 despite her mother's death, which she partly accepts blame for. If I wanted to nitpick, there is an argument that trusting D'Vorah is an evil act in and of itself, and she did terminate Shujinko, but thankfully that second one was non-canon. That's enough on Cassie, she's basically an angel compared to the others here.
Cetrion.
Cetrion I feel is somewhat comparable to Blaze in the sense that she's neutral. By all accounts, she is the good to her brother Shinnok's evil.
As was my brother, Shinnok. The darkness to my light.
However, she works under Kronika and either commits or attempts to commit detestable acts. An interesting question is whether Cetrion has free will to act on her own, or if everything she does is in service of her mother.
I abide my mother's will.
Either way, I think threatening to end Jackie's life and assisting Kronika in blowing up the current timeline are just straight up evil acts. She allows her allegiance to Kronika to detract from her quest for peace and virtue. But I will give credit where it's due because she was the sole reason Shinnok remained restricted to the Netherrealm for as long as he did. Still, she has done some objectively terrible things. Chief among them is aiding Kronika on her quest to essentially revive Shinnok and keep the universe balanced. As I said though, my biggest question is of free will, and whether she has any.
The greatest virtue is abiding my mother's will, Liu Kang.
Cetrion, I'm trying to help you here, but you're not doing yourself any favors. This is one of the weirder ones to assess from an objective standpoint, but I think I feel safe going kinda evil here. She does have some redeeming qualities, but at the same time, she does do some terrible things.
Chameleon.
Chameleon couldn't have a more fitting name because you barely see him in the series. As far as where his affiliations lie and his evil level, your guess is as good as mine. By all accounts, he fights for the forces of darkness in Armageddon, and he's referred to as one of Shao Kahn's deadliest warriors. But what he's done specifically is truly unknown. Based on a lack of evidence, I'm going right in the middle with evil.
Cyrax.
To better serve her, Sub-Zero. We defend Kronika as she rewrites history.
Mustard is one of those cases where he toes the line between good and evil, but he's mostly been a good guy or cyborg. He was forced into the Cyber Initiative program despite being the polar opposite of Sector, who willingly volunteered. I think it's safe to assume that Cyrax went on to commit heinous acts, but not of his own free will. On that note alone, I think it's fair to say that he is less than evil. His or her soul is much more pure than Sector's, but we'll get to that later. This general storyline for Cyrax remains consistent throughout the series, even in MK9 through MK11, where he eventually becomes a soulless cyborg working for Outworld. Cyrax is a bit different in MK9 in that he works for Outworld pre-cyberization rather than only working for Outworld because he became a cyborg. That does make him more irredeemable, but he's still no Sector. We could safely assume that Cyrax as a character has done bad things before cyberization, but what those were, I really don't know. Kinda evil feels like a good spot for Cyrax.
Daegon.
Daegon is a character with almost no gray area when it comes to his position in the universe. He's just straight up evil. He's the polar opposite of Taven, and he makes it known that his only desire is just to be a bad guy. He takes out his parents, thanks to maybe influence by Shinnok.
I killed them. I had to. Lord Shinnok warned me that they had decided to assist you.
He forms the Red Dragon, conducts experiments on dragons, aligns himself with the likes of Shinnok, you-know-what's Takeda's mom, And the list goes on, meaning this category has his name written all over it.
Dairou.
Dairou is another interesting character who exhibits mostly evil traits but is technically neutral. A resident of Order Realm, he lived his life according to the law, but took a man's life who had eradicated his family. This crime landed him in jail and he escaped during a riot and became a mercenary. Poseidon is responsible for pursuing a bounty placed on Hotaru's head, but it's presumed that this was either unsuccessful or non-canon because Hotaru is in Armageddon. This character really does feel like he toes the line, but he did fight for the forces of darkness since no forces of neutrality existed. And that tells me he leans evil overall. He's definitely done some bad things based on what we've learned, and no, I'm not including MK1 Havoc in this specific discussion. He's far less evil than some others, so I'm gonna put him in kinda evil.
Darrius.
It's only fitting to follow Dairou with Darrius, considering they're both from Order Realm. Although technically neutral, I don't think you can argue that Darrius isn't a bad dude. Wait, does that make sense? His deception bio reveals bluntly that some would call him a terrorist. But, and I quote, "To the true patriots of Sidon, I am a hero." Unquote. It turns out he was the one who orchestrated the slayings of Dairou's family and used it as a ruse for him to end up in prison, where he'd break him out of prison and gain his loyalty. Sounds pretty bad to me, Mr. Neutral. He returned as a cameo in MK1 and remains supposedly neutral, but he does aid and abet the villains for his entire time on screen in the story mode. We don't get a bio or anything, unfortunately, but based on the eye test and his history, I think you could make the case that Darrius is of the devil caliber. But I personally wouldn't put him among the series' most detestable, so very evil is a good spot for Darrius.
Drahmin.
A wandering Oni allied with Moloch. Drahmin was once a vicious landlord.
Drahmin is honestly as evil as it gets in this series. He's a former ruthless landlord turned Oni demon from the Netherrealm, which is the MK version of Hell.
Welcome to hell.
I can't say for sure, but I don't know that Drahmin's done a single good thing in his life, apart from desiring to take out Quan Chi. He doesn't quite have the same track record comparable to other characters we'll get to, but he's up there without a doubt. He and Moloch even threatened to eliminate Scorpion at one point, which is impressive, but he survives the ordeal. He also doesn't shower. Again, the track record isn't quite there, but he's basically the devil. Wow, speaking of the devil, do you hear that music? This feels almost like beating a dead horse because all I have to say is Baraka, Mileena, and Hanzo. And we could put D'Vorah where she belongs. But I do think it's worth expanding a bit on her motivations. Everything she does is in service of and to benefit
the Hive.
So that's like kind of something. And by that, I mean it's not always out of self-fulfillment, but she could very well be the least loyal character in MK history, constantly shifting her allegiances to stay alive and evil. Yeah, and as I mentioned a few seconds ago and multiple times on this channel, she brings an end to 3 of the most beloved characters ever. So that alone puts her amongst the elite of the evil. I don't think you can even argue that. Regardless of her motivations, D'Vorah might very well be the devil. Everything she does is certifiably repulsive.
We are many. You are but one.
Ermac might seem like an obvious very evil or higher from the jump, but they are a bit more complex than that. This character is a collection of souls harbored in what I think is one of the coolest and most unique character designs ever. My obvious drooling aside, Ermac's evil level has shifted quite a bit since their debut. This collection of souls obviously serves Shao Kahn for a good portion of the original timeline. But something happened in Deception that flipped the narrative. They broke free of Shao Kahn's control and began assisting a deceased Liu Kang in reviving his friends who lost their lives thanks to the Deadly Alliance. That is absolutely a notch in the non-evil department. They also fight for the forces of light to round out the original timeline. MK9 through MKX turned Ermac entirely evil with none of the complexities we saw previously. They serve Shao Kahn, disarm Jax, and lose a whole bunch of fights. It's a pretty similar case in MKX as well, whereas MK1 offered a bit of both good and evil. This time Ermac is a product of Quan Chi's Soul NATO, who fights for the Deadly Alliance. However, a loss to Mileena allowed King Jared, a soul contained within Ermac, to control the physical body. This turned him good for the remainder of the story before he presumably lost control again. Based on all that, I think there is an argument to be made for any category above the bottom and below the top. Ermac is kind of an outlier, so he can just get the evil tag. even if there is an element of free will here.
Erron Black.
Erron Black might be one of the lost members of the Order realm because here's a guy who presents neutral but has shown small glimpses of good and evil. His 2 appearances in MKX and MK11 depict him mostly working for Outworld. First with Kotal Kahn, and then the 2 Erron Blacks in MK11 offer good and evil traits. The past version that emerges through the Timequake immediately sides with Shao Kahn, Kronika, Kano, and pretty much all the evildoers you could conjure up. Later on, the past version sides with Katana, which is an interesting dichotomy and might be a clever commentary on Erron Black's overall character. Or it could speak to his evolution over time. All that said, I think evil is the perfect landing spot, even though I really do believe his loyalties lie with whoever gives him the most money. I'm just not so sure that Katana and company were paying top dollar for present Erron services, but I could be wrong.
Ferra.
Across basically 1.5 appearances, Ferra Torr are a challenging duo to place in one specific category without hesitation. It's interesting to me too because I don't think I'd necessarily call Kotal a villain per se in MKX. He just so happens to be the Khan of Outworld, but unlike Shao, he exhibits none of the former Emperor's traits. Anyway, back to Ferra Torr. This pair feels like a straightforward enforcer for Outworld, a la Erron Black. They only appear briefly in MKX where they essentially defend Kotal and their realm. Given the limited sample size, I feel kinda evil is okay and we just move on.
Frost.
Yeah, Frost is just straight up the Ice Queen.
You ignored me my entire life.
Alright, I will expand on it a little bit, but I genuinely don't think Frost has a single redeeming moment since her debut in Deadly Alliance. She constantly felt belittled by Kuai Liang, which she used as motivation to overthrow his position as Grand Master of the Lin Kuei. She attempted to steal his sacred dragon medallion and freeze him, which didn't work. She then wakes up in an icy coffin and thinks he left her to die, so she plots her revenge, and then fights for the forces of darkness. There are small glimpses of decency in the second timeline for Frost, but history repeats itself again. Then she voluntarily becomes a cyborg, and that's pretty much a wrap. She's one of Kronika's many minions, and she holds nothing but hatred for Kuai Liang. Frost is hot-headed and just bad at her core. Like I said,
Fujin.
as easy as Frost was, I think Fujin might be even easier. This guy is an angel compared to the vast majority of this roster. Just to name a few things he's done, he fights Bi-Han and Shinnok, replaces Raiden as protector of Earthrealm, attempts to save Raiden from the Dark and Liu Kang from Raiden's curse, defends Earthrealm in MKX, follows the plan to a T in MK11 Aftermath, and the list goes on. I think, if you're really grasping, you could say Fujin took part in arguably the most depressing timeline imaginable with Titan Shang Tsung, but that was not of his own free will. Assuming he had no ability to break out of whatever hold Shang had on him, and based on his history before that, Fujin is one of the good ones.
Geras.
Like Cetrion before him, at first Geras falls into the simp for Kronika category, so to speak. She created him solely to serve her and to help her achieve her goal of restarting time. In that regard, we return to the free will concept, of which Geras has none by all accounts. So this makes it a tricky scenario, because it would make sense to put him in the lowest possible category. I mean, even though he's done bad things in service of Kronika, he had no choice in the matter. He's died multiple times, and if he can feel pain, he's felt a lot of it. No person in their right mind would do that if they could choose not to. Then he's just a straightforward good guy in MK1, so that works out in his favor. Despite the free will argument, we can comfortably say he still carried out some evil things, so kinda evil feels like the correct choice here.
Goro.
The beloved four-armed Shao Kahn Goro is another situation where you might think the answer is clear as day, but that's not quite the case. I mean, sure, he does serve Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn, where the ultimate goal is to take over Earthrealm. At least one tiny glimmer of goodness arrives in the form of a peace treaty with the Centaurians in MK4 and making peace with Kung Lao, whose ancestor Goro terminated before the first game. From there on out, it's pretty much all bad again. Pairing up with Shao Kahn again, reclaiming Outworld, fighting Taven, and finally fighting for the forces of darkness.
Enjoying the view.
Who are you? What are you doing here?
At ease, Shao Kahn. I am looking for Quan Chi. Have you seen him?
He is with the Emperor. I am Goro. I have been ordered to let no one pass under penalty of death.
My death? Or yours?
Man, I love that. He remains evil through MK9, but becomes somewhat sympathetic in the MKX comics. He is depicted slaughtering the Aztec, but then Kotal gets revenge. Goro comes to terms with this failure after losing to Kotal and asks his father to put him down. Then, Goro has to watch his dad die, but they kind of had it coming. And then this happens. Then in MK1, he's evil again, so I don't know. I think he's bad, but he's not quite the devil, so let's go very evil on Goro.
Havoc.
Yeah, no real gray area here, everyone. This is Havoc we're talking about, but before we get into the evil tendencies, he was technically neutral in the original timeline. As you've seen a few times already, the neutral characters rarely fall on the good side of neutral. But rather than wanting death or control over the entire universe, Havoc instead wants one thing.
Chaos.
Want to know how I know how? He says it 1,337 times in Chaos Reigns. And yes, you could say I'm jumping ahead, but the Chaos part has remained consistent from his debut in Deception. In Deception alone, he revives Cabal after a run-in with Movado and convinces him to revive the Black Dragon. Pretty bad. He ends up fighting for the Forces of Darkness, also pretty bad. And then we have the MKX comics, which is a whole different discussion entirely, where he assembles the Kami Dogu with Shinnok's amulet and is basically the primary antagonist. He basically manipulates and eventually possesses pretty much every hero imaginable.
But wait!
Believe me, there's a lot here. I could go through it all, but I think it kind of speaks for itself. Then, as I said, there's MK1, where he's neutral as Dairou, then becomes Havoc, and finally there's Titan Havoc, who again assembles the Kami Dogu and attempts total control. That just about covers it.
Hotaru.
Here we have another technically neutral guy from Order Realm. The one who becomes a target of Dairou, but before that, he makes it abundantly clear that he bought the Onaga propaganda. He fights for Onaga as he believes the Dragon King's cause will eventually lead to order. Hotaru once hated the Tarkatans and then fought alongside them, all in service of Onaga. He's also responsible for throwing Shujinko in prison for trying to enlist his help to fight the Deadly Alliance. The neutral aspect of his character remains interesting because I do think maybe he felt Onaga's goal was to bring peace. For whatever reason. But anyone aligning with Onaga is very evil at minimum. Depending on the circumstance, of course.
Hsu Hao.
One of the biggest memes in Mortal Kombat history and a character that the developers infamously hated.
But Mortal Kombat Armageddon is about bringing every character back to life, so Hsu Hao is back. Much to my dismay.
Hsu Hao. Oh boy. This is a character who honestly never had a chance, but he's not a very good guy.
Hsu Hao is one of the Red Dragon clan, so he is definitely one of the bad guys.
A member of the Red Dragon? A spy embedded in the Special Forces? Destroyed the Outer World Investigation Agency? I wouldn't say he's the devil necessarily, contrary to what the developers would have you believe. He doesn't have the longevity or the rap sheet of some others, so very evil works for him.
Jackie Briggs.
I'm not discussing it.
Jackie Briggs is a character I feel I have to spend even less time on than Cassie. She just isn't evil whatsoever. Could she have done things in her military past that would be considered evil? Possibly, but let's just move forward.
Jade.
Now Jade definitely is not Jackie. Here we have an Outworld assassin who worked alongside Kitana and under Shao Kahn for presumably many years. Has she done terrible things? I think it's safe to say yes. Anyone working for Shao Kahn as his assassin has to be somewhat evil, just in general. As far as what she's done specifically, it's hard to say because there's not much to go on. She considers betraying Kitana in the original timeline, but ultimately goes back on that. She then spends the rest of the original timeline on the good side. Jade's MK9 bio reveals that she was given to Shao Kahn by her family as a child. So that changes the narrative quite a bit.
I failed you, Kitana. Now I will make amends.
And for the first time in this video, we have to cover the dreaded Revenants, a concept born in MK9 that turned the vast majority of heroes into unwilling villains. This is something I struggled to apply the logic of this video to because this character has done terrible things, but as a Revenant. So, is it a situation where they are completely free of any crimes they've committed as a Revenant? Should I separate them as two different characters entirely? Let me know how you'd approach this subject, but for me, I feel obligated to say kinda evil just because she was an assassin, which tells me she likely took the lives of a few people who weren't deserving of it.
Janet Cage.
I honestly considered leaving Janet Cage out entirely because she's barely a character, but hey, I'm a completionist. She had a one-off 2-second appearance in the MK1 story mode and remained stuck in the cameo role thereafter. This scene pretty much says everything you need to know. I'm just gonna put her here because I have no idea.
Jarek.
Jarek of the now infamous appeared only a few times in the series, but we've seen enough. He a bad dude. But what's weird is he fought alongside the rest of Earthrealm in MK4. That doesn't necessarily make him a good guy, but it's something, I suppose. Jarek's Armageddon bio paints a picture of what he's really all about. Slighted by Jax's attempted you-know-what via cliff drop, he just wanted to fatal every good person. He joined the forces of darkness, because of course he did. Oh, and did I mention he's a member of the Black Dragon? His only other appearance was in the MKX comics where he's just a Black Dragon henchman once again. Jarek helps kidnap Cassie and Jackie and later aids Kotal's forces in the battle against the Shao Kahn. Had it not been for Jarek helping Earthrealm in MK4, I'd probably put him at the top, but I think Very Evil is the spot for him.
Jax.
A perfect follow-up for Jarek is his good old buddy Jax, the metal-armed monster of the Special Forces. I think Jax has remained a good egg for the most part throughout his many appearances. Oh right, there's that. Unfortunately, even in the original timeline, Jax fell victim to the Dragon King's control, where, by his own words, he terminated the people he dedicated his life to protect. He also trusted Hsu Hao, which might be even worse. In the second timeline, Jax had a really rough go at it. He loses his arms to Ermac and later perishes at the hands of Sindel, turning him into one of the many revenants controlled by Quan Chi. History repeated itself once again as Jax carried out heinous acts while under this trance. He's eventually restored by Raiden and falls into a deep depression before turning to Kronika in MK11, who convinces him that she can reshape history and provide a better life for Jackie. This is a weird one for me because his intentions are good, as are Kronika's, at least theoretically. Again, it's crazy to say, but I have to give Jax a pass on the various possessions he's experienced. And the Kronika stuff was out of love for Jackie and his desire to fix her dysfunctional life. That said, he trusted Kronika and this group of the literal worst people, so I have to go kinda evil. I just don't know how you look at this collection and think it's a good idea to come out of retirement. Also, Jax dropping Jarek to his death is borderline insane. Sorry, Jax.
Johnny Cage.
Johnny Cage is a bad man, and I mean that in the best way possible. The one-time Shinnok Eradicator proved just how good he can be when he's at his best. Aside from bad movies and his questionable approach to women,
brother, as younger you, I solemnly swear to tap that at the earliest opportunity.
I struggled to find a single bad thing Johnny did in this series. He's even a great father and has never had the displeasure of being a revenant, although he almost got there. I can't confidently say that he's never done something bad, but I think there's a difference between bad and evil. Is this bad or evil? So Johnny's going here.
Let's see what you're made of.
Cabal is one of the select few who suffered the wrath of MK11, but before we get there, he did have an evil stint in the original timeline. Cabal was initially bad in MK3 before turning good after fighting against Shao Kahn's invasion. But following his near-fatal attack at the hands of Mavado, Havoc revived him and convinced him to revive the Black Dragon. He spent the rest of the timeline in this position, even serving Mavado a dish best served cold. In MK9, he's a straightforward good guy despite suffering horrific burns and receiving an offer from Kano to rejoin the Black Dragon. He then gets Sindeled and spends all of MKX as a revenant. Then, for some unimaginable reason, MK11 retconned Cabal's goodness, instead making his past version Kano's sidekick in the Black Dragon. This makes Cabal the only character by my count whose past and revenant versions are both evil. Anyway, this was tough, but I think good/evil Cabal is about 50-50. So I'm gonna place him in the evil tier. Kai. A character NetherRealm has not acknowledged in 600 years. I got nothing else to say other than he's not evil.
Kano.
Kano is basically the devil, guys. I mean, come on.
Good idea.
This dude is rotten to the core, and I don't think he's done a single good thing in this entire series. Constantly the op, but never the final boss. Kano was only loyal to Kano, and he would sell even his closest ally down the river just to make some coin or advance his position. I really don't know what else to say, but I think this scene in MK11 highlights Kano at his most evil. Locking Sonya in a cage to fight Cage, amongst others. He's a pretty important figure in this game as a villain purely to place himself atop the food chain in this new era. The Black Dragon, constant betrayals, illegal arms dealing, somehow stealing Shinnok's amulet.
When Kano misappropriated Shinnok's amulet.
Constantly antagonizing Sonya and pretty much everyone else. I could spend an immeasurable amount of time on Kano's many evil acts, but let's just leave it at this. Kenshi is a character who has always leaned way more on the good side than the evil side. Based on his backstory, he was one of the first characters lore-wise to get effed over by Shang Tsung. From there on out, he made it a goal to hunt down the sorcerer. He also crossed paths numerous times with the Red Dragon and didn't really do anything too bad in the OG timeline, except for cutting down Shiva. He's a DLC character in MK9 before he abandons his unexpected son, Takeda. He leaves his child with a clan of ninja led by Hanzo Hasashi. Whether that's evil or not is up for debate, but I suppose Kenshi had some stuff to figure out. He's honestly pretty clean after that. MK1 is where I'm obligated to mention that he was part of the Yakuza alongside his former son turned cousin, Takeda. However, he was basically born into the situation and it doesn't outline anything bad he's done specifically. Although I do want to give Kenshi the ultimate pass, I can't ignore the Yakuza stuff, so I'm gonna put him in kinda evil.
Chameleon.
The female Chameleon is a character we know more about than the male version, but not by much in all honesty. She was good in the first timeline as one of the last remaining Cetrions in the universe. Her desire was simple, to exact revenge on Shao Kahn for taking out almost her entire race. Chameleon's story in MK1 is pretty mysterious, but she is an Umgadi who fights alongside Tanya and defends the Edenian royal hierarchy. I couldn't find any evidence to the contrary, so... Kentaro has always been an enforcer for the bad guys, as seen in his few appearances across the series. Unlike Goro, however, we never see his involvement in this peace treaty or any attempts to build bridges with former enemies. Although I suppose Kentaro could have been involved in the peace treaty, but he just never appears. In fact, there really wasn't much nuance to Kentaro whatsoever until the MKX comics, where he becomes somewhat sympathetic. He witnesses the fall of Goro and King Gorbak in rapid succession, then unsuccessfully attacks the Aztec city of Zunkara. After losing this fight and denying Goro his rightful claim to the throne, the Shokan reach a peace agreement with the Aztec and join the rest of Outworld on a mission to eliminate Reiko and Melina. Then, Sonya removes Kentaro's head, making this his last appearance in the series, which is just an absolute injustice to an otherwise great character. Anyway, I think Kentaro's ceding to Kotal at least provided a shred of decency, even if it took the losses of Goro and his dad to get there. I'm going very evil for Kentaro mainly because most of his time is spent serving Shang Tsung and Shao Kahn, doing God knows what. Kira is another character we have very little tape on, so to speak. She's only appeared a few times and most of that is spent alongside her duo, Kenbra, as members of the Black Dragon. As we know, that group doesn't have the greatest track record considering they're criminals. I mean, this line alone in her Deception bio kind of says it all. Yeah, this one isn't great either. Also, not canon, but anyone willing to become one of the Ghostface serial thrillers should be in a league of their own. But very evil feels just right.
Kitana.
I'm not gonna overdo the Revenant alert here, but yeah, Kitana is one of them. Revenant Katana is demon tier, while non-Revenant is of the Liu Kang ilk. It's tough to assess Katana pre-MK2 because we really don't know. Her fake father brainwashed her into working for him, likely harming innocents on his behalf. I think we could safely assume that Katana's done some terrible things during her time in the series. But ignoring Revenant Katana, she has been mostly good. Even in MK9, where she technically begins as a villain, she only KOs Jade basically out of self-defense, and everything else is just okay. Although, since I did put Jade in kinda evil for the whole assassin thing, I think it's fair enough to put Katana in the same tier. I mean, 10,000 years is a long time to work for a ruthless warmonger.
Cobra.
Unlike Kira, who was undoubtable, Cobra is actually an interesting case on the topic of evil. Before joining the Black Dragon, he was a true vigilante in every sense of the word. He was basically a serial thriller in the sense that he eliminated common street thugs and criminals, just trying to showcase his superior martial arts expertise. He steadily became an actual criminal, even losing track of how many lives he claimed before joining Cabal and Kira's new Black Dragon clan. Also, there's the Ghostface angle, but not canon, so I think it's only fitting to place him alongside Kira in Very Evil.
Collector.
We don't know much about Collector, but he's definitely evil. At the time MK11 dropped, he was essentially a modern-day Reiko, but he has more arms, doesn't look as intimidating, and he's got a cool lamp thing. I'm not one to judge a book by its cover, but would you say Collector looks evil? His name comes from his occupation, a collector of tributes and debts for the people of Outworld. Collector has built himself a nice nest egg and will stop at nothing to maintain it. Full transparency, he doesn't do much of significance in his lone appearance in MK11, but I don't think you need a whole lot to make a judgment here. The Naknaden is Shao Kahn's biggest supporter. That alone warrants a spot amongst the elite of the evil.
Kotal Kahn.
I feel as though Kotal Kahn is a matter of perspective. To someone like Melina, you know where he'd land, but to the average Outworlder just trying to get by, anything is better than Shao Kahn. I can only imagine how tiring it would be to be under Shao Kahn's rule as he continuously wants to attack other realms and assert his dominance. Kotal, in a sense, is kind of the antithesis.
Wait.
Apart from his trust and potential relationship with D'Vorah. I think Kotal presents neutral, which is way more than I could say for Shao. He doesn't do anything that I would consider outwardly evil in MKX, unless you're a big Melina fan. He does deceive the special forces at times, especially when it comes to Shinnok's amulet.
I will kill you both.
Shinnok's been freed. He's at Raiden's Sky Temple. He's already infected Earthrealm's life force.
The heavens boil. Earthrealm is lost.
Not if we hang together.
I will appease Shinnok. Bring him your heads. Gain time to bolster Outworld's defenses.
Not a great look, honestly. However, I really do believe he did this out of dedication to Outworld. Despite being the one who introduced the idea of aligning with Earthrealm, Kotal's loyalties do shift quite a bit throughout MKX. I would say he leans mostly good in MK11, not including his attempt to destroy every Tarkhan in sight, which of course stems from their support of Melina before her death. The MKX comics really flesh out Kotal, but I didn't see anything too evil in there, except for the whole blood code thing. It's really just Kotal doing everything he can in the best interest of Outworld, with a specific focus on locating and eliminating Melina and the other insurrectionists. I feel that you could argue that the people of Outworld should have the right to choose who runs Outworld. As I said though, I think you could say that an Outworlder would not see Kotal as evil, but objectively he has done quite a few evil things.
Line them up. Execute them.
I'm gonna put him smack dab in the middle in evil, although I wouldn't argue with very evil.
Chronica.
I touched on this with Cetrion and Geras, but the overarching question is whether Chronica is a villain or not. By definition, I'm inclined to say no, but I don't think it's really a yes or no answer. As a Titan, she is the purveyor of balance in this universe, and thus, in MK11, she is fulfilling her purpose by any means necessary. Raiden eliminating Shinnok violated that balance, as he is the dark to Cetrion's light. I think you could argue that he also disturbed this balance by defeating Shao Kahn in MK9, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. Either way, Chronica has a purpose she is meant to fulfill, to ensure the universe is in a never-ending battle between good and evil. That sounds like a neutral concept by definition, but I think it's deeper than that. When you really think about it, why can't the universe bend to ultimate goodness? Would that mean Chronica couldn't or wouldn't exist, or she'd have no purpose? Shinnok's comeuppance to end MKX signaled that the universe could head in a more positive direction. destruction, which is where she enters to f shit up in layman's terms. She's also quite manipulative, promising greatness to literally the worst individuals the series has to offer, and Jax. I think there's a real philosophical conversation to be had here, because although neutrality is technically at Kronika's core, she's basically telling us that she never wants peace across the realms and transversely never wants only chaos. I would be interested in an alternate reality where Cetrion is in peril and whether Kronika would come to the universe's aid in the name of balance. Objectively, I don't think Kronika's motivations are as gray as they seem, but is she simply justifying her presence in the series? These are questions that I'm not sure have answers, but I think her presence leans very evil because although she doesn't want chaos and destruction,
we have played out all possible scenarios, Raiden. You cannot win.
She kinda does. Also, she sucks.
Kung Jin.
Yeah, I don't think we need to spend too much time here. Like the other two combat kids I've already covered, there's a very small sample size for Kung Jin, considering he hasn't really returned to the series since MKX. However, unlike Cassie and Jackie, Kung Jin was a thief, so that's something. He stole something from Rai Cho in the MKX comics, and Raiden caught him stealing a family heirloom in the MKX story. We don't know what kind of thief he was, but I really don't think, considering the characters we've covered so far, I can call Kung Jin even kind of evil. Thievery is basically petty crime in this universe.
Kung Lao.
We have to queue up another Revenant alert here, so you've been warned. Anyway, Kung Lao is just not evil. Is he cocky? Sure. Brash at times? Definitely. The Chosen One? Not even once. To Lao's credit though, he's just a straightforward hero in every sense of the word, constantly fighting for Earthrealm and challenging its opposition. Yeah, there is the stint as the Revenant, but that's basically an entirely different character without that thing we've discussed. I think it's safe to say Kung Lao belongs among the good ones.
Li Mei.
I'm sorry you made that necessary.
In an alternate timeline, Li Mei shacked up with Onaga, and the rest was history. In reality, Li Mei is one of the good ones. I got nothing else on this. Next character.
Liu Kang.
That is messing with me.
I honestly think Liu Kang could slay his own flesh and blood in canon, and it still wouldn't be enough for me to consider him even kinda evil. This might very well be the purest character across the franchise. He's defeated the universe's most threatening forces consistently, one of them twice. Listen, there is Zombie Liu Kang and Revenant Liu Kang, but if you've made it this far, please drop a like by the way and comment ZLK right now because I need validation. Sorry. You know where I stand on these subplots where the characters really aren't themselves. They've been corrupted and forced to carry out truly horrendous acts. I won't lie though, it's weird to say that a character who technically massacred innocents in 2 different timelines has never done a bad thing. But this picture alone is my defense of that position. But on second thought, he did allow everyone he loves to pretty much die in MK11 Aftermath just to pull one over on Shang Tsung.
And to ensure victory, you sacrifice the lives of your friends. How deliciously cold-blooded.
That's pretty diabolical.
Madame Bo.
Madame Bo is incredible. She is the physical embodiment of just a pure soul looking to guide our heroes toward their destiny. Like Janet Cage, Madame Bo's story is limited at best, but she at least appears in the damn story mode for longer than 2 seconds. She does put together a ruse to prepare Raiden and company for the adventure ahead, but that was just awesome. I mean, her commitment to the role is unprecedented. Also, she rips darts, which is incredible. Yeah, she goes here.
Mavado.
The old hook sword thief himself. He's bad, everyone. Very bad. But is he evil? Well, yes, but let me explain. He attempted to eliminate Cabal and took his hook swords. That alone warrants evil at the very minimum. But let's expand on that. He took Cabal's swords. He took Cabal's swords. He was also partly responsible for Hsu Hao infiltrating the OWA and destroying their facility, fighting for the forces of darkness, and he's not any better in the MKX comics either. There is a definite argument for devil here, but I'm going very evil for Mavado.
Meat.
Honestly, we know f*** all about Meat as a character. We know he's the result of Shang Tsung's failed flesh pit experiments. You would think that that would make him revolt against Shang, but again, we know nothing about Meat. By default, I think it only makes sense to say he's never done a bad thing in his life. I love Meat.
Mileena.
Let's dance.
Oh boy. Here we go. So, Mileena is a character who, like Meat, is the product of Shang Tsung's f***ed up experiments. However, she's pretty much always been evil. But is she really? Like, let's really think about this one for a second. What has been the recurring theme in this video? Free will. Could Mileena ever be of sound mind to make a decision without outside influence? I'd honestly say no. She was built in a lab fusing together Edenian and Tarkatan DNA. I, nor anyone else, can speak to her upbringing, but I can only imagine that Shao Kahn was like, hey, I am the absolute best emperor/ruler in Outworld, and the rest of the universe needs me, so just believe me, okay? Something along those lines. I don't know that Mileena could think critically outside of what she knew. It goes back to the age-old argument of whether people are born or made evil. I genuinely think Mileena fits both categories. She was born to be evil. That's not to absolve her of every single bad thing she's done, because she wasn't under a revenant trance, per se. Or was she? I feel that her MK9 bio explains her position perfectly. She's definitely evil for the vast majority of her time in the series. I have to at least make that abundantly clear, but this is a discussion worth having. It's more of the same in MK9, whereas MKX is slightly different, but she is still technically evil. Then MK1 flips that around, making her good when she's not having a Tarkat outbreak. This might be controversial, but considering her background and MK1, I'm going right in the middle at evil.
Mocap. Moloch.
Only a few named Oni characters exist in universe, and Moloch is one of them. He's basically a monstrous airhead. I don't have much to say in particular here, but I think this line on his bio card says everything that needs to be said.
Devil. Motaro.
Motaro is a lot like Goro, but with way fewer appearances. Unfortunately, as an aside, his intricate design essentially kept him sidelined for much of the series until they butchered him.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Anyway, we have far less information on Motaro, but he is part of the extermination squads in MK3. He also takes down Johnny Cage, and is just an all-around rock for Shao Kahn. That is, when Raiden's not spearing him through a bridge, which ended him. He was presumably involved in the Shao Kahn peace treaty situation. This could be him, but it's never explicitly stated. This one is tough, but I'm gonna go Devil here just because Motaro has shown fewer redeemable qualities than Kintaro and Goro.
Nightwolf.
I said earlier that Liu Kang might have the purest soul in all of MK, but Nightwolf isn't far off. Disregarding his Revenant counterpart, I really don't think Nightwolf has done anything even remotely evil across his numerous appearances. Certain exchanges like this really highlight how good Nightwolf is.
You are not the only one whose people have been victimized. But I have found new purpose in serving the spirits. I do not cling to the past.
If I had to reach, I'd say the Sin Eater ritual in his MK Deception storyline was bad conceptually, but it was all for the greater good as it allowed him to send Onaga to the Netherrealm. Overall though, never done a bad thing.
Is she an angel?
Natara is one of those characters who might end up landing in the middle when all is said and done. However, her first stint in the series really isn't that evil. In fact, she spent her first appearance searching for an orb that bound her realm of Vaeternus to Outworld. She simply wanted independence from Outworld, as it had always been before. She does exploit Cyrax and Reptile en route to obtaining the orb, but that's minor compared to some of the other crazy shit we've seen. Later on, she learns that Ashrah's been on a rampage, slaying her fellow Vaeternians in pursuit of a purified soul. She fought Ashrah, and that was pretty much the end of Natara in the first timeline. In MK1, she's just evil, both in reality and toward our eardrums.
All Earthrealmers will soon know of Vaeternus. My realm starves, and it's coming here to feed.
She aids the villains, but does little of significance beyond that.
Serena's right. Because of Quan Chi's magic, my realm's people are no longer poisoned by sunlight. We've finally escaped the shadows.
I think the real question here is whether we can deem all Vaeternians as evil. After all, they require the blood of living beings to continue living. But is that their fault? Is that evil, or is that just life? That's a more philosophical question beyond the bounds of this discussion, but I do think we can place Nitara in evil. She's bad in this timeline, but wasn't as evil in the first timeline. Also, forces of darkness.
Grandmaster Chaos.
Fear me.
Alright, here we go with another all-timer. Just for reference, I'm gonna cover Bi-Han overall in this part because let's be real, Kuai Liang is the Sub-Zero. Make no mistake about it, Bi-Han is evil, but the crazy part is that his arc is somewhat unjust based on how everything shakes out. But let's start a bit earlier with the fact that he's a member of the Lin Kuei, a clan of thieves and assassins. Not exactly the best look, but again, we've seen some truly horrible things so far. Regardless, I kinda believe that Bi-Han has always leaned evil. I mean, you can't be a good guy if you're an assassin, just in general. At best, you're an anti-hero. I've always felt this exchange in mythologies explains Bi-Han perfectly.
Quan Chi told me that you sent me because my soul was tainted with evil. Is that true?
You are a superb warrior, Sub-Zero. Only you can control your destiny. Not even the gods can alter your chosen path in life.
Was that a yes or a no?
That was a yes.
He couldn't exist in the Netherrealm if he weren't evil, but then he chooses to remain evil by all accounts. Was he complicit in eliminating the Shirai Ryu? Not really. He does still terminate a mortal enemy, which is evil in general, but also expected. He then goes full evil after Scorpion takes his life and he becomes Noob Saibot. Like, no doubt about that whatsoever. Worked for Shao Kahn, Shinnok, Quan Chi, etc. It's more of the same in the second timeline, except Bi-Han is painted more as a victim, in that he eliminated Hanzo but didn't take part in the attack on the Shirai Ryu.
I killed your brother because I thought he...
Quan Chi is responsible for Bi-Han's death.
He becomes Noob again and is evil once again through MK11, still holding grudges and working for the bad guys. MK1 kinda leaves no doubt about where Bi-Han stands. He's evil. Takes down his own father, betrays his brother, and has no real loyalty to anyone other than himself. And Sector. And the bad guys, I guess. The attack on Kuai Liang's wedding is probably the best example of Bi-Han being an a-hole. He does help Earthrealm and Chaos Reigns, but that was out of necessity and revenge rather than choice. I'm curious whether all of you would deem Bi-Han as a devil character or not. He does have some redeeming qualities and really is a victim of circumstance. As I said, he's done terrible things, but was also one of the first known revenants under Quan Chi's full control. Similar to Scorpion, so I think evil makes the most sense here.
Onaga, former Emperor of Outworld, the Dragon King.
The one issue with this format is that we all know where some of these guys rank. Onaga is the cream of the crop when it comes to evilness. A small sample size, yes, but his ranking amongst the elite might be even more impressive in that sense. Not much is known about Onaga in the earlier days other than he was the emperor, and then Shao Kahn murked him with poison and became emperor himself. So began a plot that would span decades to corrupt the mind of an innocent, young, impressionable child. You all know this story. Onaga projected himself as an avatar called Damashi. He proceeded to corrupt this gentleman's mind well into his elder years, all to eventually return in his true form. This arc lends to Onaga being one of the most deceitful, unforgiving characters we've ever seen. The payoff comes in the form of Onaga returning via Reptile's possession and Shujinko assembling the Kamidogu, ultimately granting the Dragon King immeasurable power. The story ends when Shujinko defeats him, but then Onaga returns from his banishment to the Netherrealm to fight for the forces of darkness in the Battle of Armageddon. He carries Shao Kahn away, but somehow loses, I guess. See this video for more on that. As I said, it's a small sample size for Onaga, but his evilness speaks for itself. I, like many of you, wish we had more of this character so we could see the true extent of his capabilities. But until that happens, he's definitely earned his spot. I think his unused tower ending really encapsulates what this character could have carried out.
My enemies have failed to prevent me from fusing all the weapons of the Elder Gods into one. I used this ultimate weapon to warp reality, merging the realms into a singular existence. The Elder Gods were helpless as I used their own power against them, in the void beyond the One Realm. Not satisfied with merely ruling the One Realm, I seized all that exists and merged it into myself. There can be only one consciousness. I am everything. I have become the One Being.
Godfather of soul magic.
I see the ninja has been successful in retrieving my map.
Another name synonymous with evil is Quan Chi. Ugh, where to even begin with this freak? It would take hours to deep dive into every horrendous thing he's done, so I'll just touch on a few. But just look at his overall presence in his very first appearance. His very second appearance. Listen, I know this game is a meme at this point, but Richard DeVizio's portrayal really is brilliant. These days, this is what I associate Quan Chi with. He's evil at his core, and he loves it. He loves being deceitful, he'll even betray his own master. This is a guy who was only loyal to himself. Almost every allegiance he's ever had crashed and burned because two evil dudes are never gonna get along long term. Either way, Quan Chi has and always will be on the wrong side of history. Case in point is what he did to the Shirai Ryu and Hanzo's family. He slaughtered an entire clan and framed someone else to fulfill his own needs. Did we get the two most iconic characters of all time out of this storyline?
Oh yeah!
But this is evil on another level. There are so many things I could point to. Invading Earthrealm with Shinnok, his rampage with Shang and Deadly Alliance, and pretty much putting everything in MK9 in motion with Shinnok. I could sit here and ramble on and on and on about the many crimes he's committed, but what's really jarring is just how much he loves it. That alone separates him from the pack. He even brought together all the villains in Armageddon. To bring this all home, Quan Chi is a villain in every sense of the word, but unlike Onaga, he has the longevity. He is the embodiment of evil in this series. No question about it.
Kid Thunder.
Raiden. What do we do with you? Where do we even start? I mean, apart from him being evil in the very first game, this seems like an easy, never done a bad thing rank and we move on. But there's just this small matter of Dark Raiden, the biggest what if in Mortal Kombat history. We've seen this arc at least twice by my count, but probably infinite times in the multiverse. The story is that this blast in Deception had a profound effect on Raiden, shattering his normal, virtuous demeanor. Instead, he goes absolutely insane, even going as far as sending ZLK's undead body on a rampage. To keep it simple, this guy went off the rails. But it was all in the name of protecting Earthrealm or whatever. It's a similar situation in MKX where Raiden goes dark toward the end of the game as a result of Shinnok and the Jinsei. He goes demon mode again, hacking off Shinnok's head and standing on business as the protector of Earthrealm. Not evil per se, because Shinnok, but damn. I also have to mention the fact that he was about to sacrifice Earthrealm souls to Quan Chi toward the end of MK9.
What do you offer?
I offer the souls of Earthrealm warriors who die in this conflict.
That's very un-Raiden-like. He shows some real glimpses of evil in MK11, famously not showing any remorse for Sonya's death and even threatening the plan in Aftermath.
Your mother died a warrior's death. May we all be so fortunate.
This, as you all know, doesn't last very long, but I mean, there is some evil going on here. On that note, as crazy as it sounds, I feel I do have to stick Raiden in kinda evil because let's be real, he's done some bad things and there's no denying that.
There are fates worse than death.
I still love you, Raiden.
Rock you like a hurricane.
Rain's a weird character because he's always presented this spoiled brat energy, if you will. Like, oh, Argus is my dad, so I'm basically an Edenian god. Bro, we get it. To my knowledge, he's really only ever been good as an alternate timeline emperor in MK1 Chaos Reigns. Outside of that, he was always on Melina's side in MKX, and as I said, the original timeline didn't have much for him, so they basically made him Rain Snow. He's always felt like a male Tanya, ulterior motives and all. Overall, he's really only ever been an evil henchman, so I don't think he quite reaches demon status, so very evil it is.
I am Reiko.
Reiko kind of fits into a similar category to Rain, except he doesn't have a good guy redemption type arc in Chaos Reigns. He's pretty much always been evil and perhaps the biggest Shao Kahn guy ever to exist. Sorry, Collector. He aided Shinnok and MK4 and basically rode with the villains through Armageddon. He probably reached peak evil in the MKX comics, where he and Havoc are essentially co-antagonists, gathering the Kamidogu and letting the Blood Code take shape. He remains in a similar evil position in MK1, where once again, he's Team General Shao. I will say that apart from the MKX comics, there's really nothing that stands out in particular about him as a villain, but he's just a big enforcer for the bad guys most of the time. He's got a definite edge to him, and he's even kind of a thief.
Tell him I will no longer enter his chamber or wear his helmet, but just between us, his helmet will belong to me in due time.
Man, I love that clip. There's an argument for very evil here, but I'm going devil for Reiko. Reptile is a tough one because I really do feel bad for him throughout almost every timeline. He's one of the last remaining members of his species after Shao Kahn destroyed almost all of them. Whether out of survival instinct or him actually being a villain, he's a henchman for Shang Tsung, Shinnok, Shao Kahn of course, and I guess technically Onaga. Also, Reptile did this pre-MK4, which landed him on trial. There have always been references to Syzoth just wanting to rebuild his race, but always finds himself doing Outworld's dirty work. I've covered this numerous times, but he's basically a punching bag in the first two timelines. He barely gets any character development of note in MK9 and MKX, and MK1 gave Reptile a much needed overhaul and a redemption arc. I don't think this is a question of whether he's evil or not, that's pretty damn clear. However, I wouldn't say he's the devil because he's mostly been a side piece, so to speak. But he has a clear motivation beyond just being evil. I'm gonna go smack dab in the middle at evil for ol' Sizey. What?
Bihan's future bestie?
Serena is quite similar to Ashrah, who we began with. They are essentially cut from the same cloth, Netherrealm demons who desired to break free from their confines and despicable acts. What's crazy is Serena's done even less evil things than Ashrah, at least in canon. She attacks Bihan in Mythologies, who is technically evil, although there is some debate about that. She then helps Kuai Liang, and she's just a straightforward good character when she returns in MKX. Serena doesn't have a whole lot of development in MK1, but she does aid Quan Chi before presumably breaking free with her sister Ashrah. At some point anyway, because she's clearly working for him here. I'm going kinda evil because she is a demon after all, but Serena has a surprisingly clean record.
Scorpion.
Scorpion is an incredibly complex character to cover on the subject of evil. You take one look at this guy and think, he looks pretty bad, but I think it's fair to say that apart from a few misguided mishaps, he hasn't done a whole lot of terrible things. The obvious one to point out is the unjust slaying of Bihan. As we covered not too long ago, this was a result of Quan Chi brainwashing Scorpion into believing Bihan was responsible for terminating pretty much everyone he loved. This sent him on a rampage of vengeance, leading to Bihan's death and reincarnation as Noob Saibot. He is the kind of neutral in the MK universe that is actually neutral and honestly leans good, if anything. As the Hellspawn Spectre, he did serve under many antagonists, but he also aided Kuai Liang at one point, had a falling out with Quan Chi who actually slayed his family, and was at odds with Drahmin and Moloch who tossed him into a Soulnado. Scorpion even served as the Elder Gods champion in their war against Onaga, but we all know Shujinko eventually dealt the final blow. Midway probably had no clue what to do with Scorpion in Armageddon, so he confronted Taven out of anger toward the Elder Gods and basically attempted to ensure Armageddon would happen. He explains his stance as such.
I am Scorpion. I seek revenge.
Revenge against me?
Against the Elder Gods. They betrayed me. As reward for doing their bidding, they promised to resurrect my clan. They are no longer dead. They are the undead. For this treachery, I will eliminate the Elder Gods' only means of saving the realms from Armageddon. I will destroy both your brother and you.
I'd say his stance is less ambiguous in the second timeline, where the story repeats itself. We see a bit of good and bad Scorpion, but he's good for almost the entirety of MKX and even takes Takeda under his wing when Kenshi goes AWOL. He doesn't do a whole lot that's outwardly evil in the second timeline after claiming Bi-Han's life and continuing to serve Quan Chi under false pretenses. I don't think I'd call it evil per se, but he did pretty much screw everyone over by hacking Quan Chi's head off. This directly led to Shinnok's return while ensuring Revenants had little to no chance of being saved. This didn't come from a place of evil, but it's kind of indirectly evil. Past Scorpion is evil-ish in MK11, but eventually changes his tune later in the game after serving Kronika, and watching his future self die. That's probably pretty important to mention. MK1 Scorpion is Kuai Liang, and he's not evil at all, but I'm not really considering that. All that said, I'm between kinda evil and evil for Scorpion. He has done bad things, but there's some unmistakable corruption and influence at play. Looking at everyone we've ranked so far, I think Scorpion fits right into evil.
Catch up.
I will show no mercy.
I'm not really sure what to say here apart from Sector has always and will always be evil. That's never changed one bit. He voluntarily became a cyborg, served with every villain character imaginable, tried to take out Taven, created the Takunin, repeated many of these things in the second timeline, and so on and so on and so forth. What I find interesting about Sector in contrast to Cyrax is that the Mustard Man clearly retains some control over his mind beyond the cyberization process. Sector has no remorse and no redeeming qualities. He or she just wants control and to inflict pain or death upon others. It's quite the dichotomy, and I really don't know what else to add here. He or she is a villain, even though the female version does show a touch more humanity than the previous iteration. I don't really care though. Sector is a character evil to the core, and that earns he or she a spot at the top.
Shang Tsung.
Your soul is mine.
Here's where I'll say that my initial plan for this video was to go through the many villains and some of the kind of tweeners and outline every or almost every bad thing they've ever done. I got about halfway through Shang Tsung and thought, well, this video could take forever. Instead, I decided to scrap that idea and kind of briefly touch on each character. Now, whether that was a good idea or not remains to be seen, and honestly is entirely up to you. But one thing I learned is that, dear lord, is Shang Tsung potentially the most evil character in this series. What can I say that hasn't been said or covered before? Every move he makes has bad intentions behind it. Stealing souls, terminating Earth's most beloved fighters, scheming behind everyone's backs, even fellow villains. Constantly finding ways to earn himself a second, third, and sometimes even a fourth life. He's a cockroach in every sense of the word. Even when you think he's gone, it turns out he was just chilling in the void, planning his big comeback to eventually become the Keeper of Time. That's just a small taste of what Shang brings to the table. He also took Liu Kang's life and soul, which I remember seeing back when Deadly Alliance came out and thinking, damn, he finally did it. He's not a henchman, far from it in fact. It may seem that way, but that's always part of a grander scheme. He constantly puts himself in positions to get what he wants, whether it's souls, control over realms, or damn near Blaze's power. I could get into his extensive rap sheet, which includes illegal purchases of firearms, by the way. But he's in the conversation of most evil without a single doubt. Not a redeeming quality in this sorcerer's body, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Indeed.
Shao Kahn.
The 1-2 punch of Shang and Shao just so happened to fall right beside each other in alphabetical order. I will say that I had most of Shao's segment recorded under the original idea, and it was just as impressive as Shang's. Or detestable, I guess. The beauty of it though is that these are two completely different characters, and bravo to Midway for that. While both are physically intimidating, Shao Kahn absolutely trounces Shang in that department. Shang can definitely scrap, don't get me wrong, but he utilizes his mind more than his fists, skulls, souls, etc. Shao on the other hand just brute forces his opponents with savagery, and he talks trash the entire time. As for his motives, it's simple, he wants Earthrealm and presumably all other realms at one point or another. As I said, it's a brilliantly different evil, but it's still evil. The rap sheet might be slightly shorter than Shang Tsung's just because he's missed a few games here and there, but it makes no difference. forced enslavement, mass you-know-what, forced marriage, capturing the souls of millions, conspiring with the worst of the worst, and the list goes on. I do have to add though that he has shown some heart in the series, specifically in the NRS era when he finds out Mileena died and when he's reunited with Twindell.
You killed Mileena? If this is true, you will die! Wife, I have missed you.
As I said with Shang Tsung, I could go on and on and on with the extensive list of horrible things Shao Kahn has done. Regardless, Shao is the elite of the elite and probably could have an entire video dedicated to the many terrible, heinous, detestable acts he's committed. Even though I do feel he has a more narrow focus than some of the other villains in terms of his overall goals, he's got a spot with the best of the worst.
The Elder Gods fear me now.
Shiva.
Sandwiched in between arguably two of the most iconic boss characters of all time is another well-known but less impactful character, Shiva. Honestly, she's of the Goro ilk in that she's just an Outworld loyalist, especially in the first timeline. What's crazy though is that she really doesn't do anything egregious apart from working for Shao Kahn. Don't get me wrong, that's bad, but hear me out. She's appointed as Sindel's personal protector, but it doesn't take long for her to be at odds with Kahn. She was displeased to see his affinity for the Centaurians when Kahn made Motaro the general of his extermination squads. This led to discourse and Shiva eventually wanted to eliminate Motaro and Shao Kahn. Then, after involving Kano in this whole situation, Kano did what Kano does. He betrayed Shiva after she supposedly took Motaro's life, even though he returns in Armageddon, by ratting her out to Shao Kahn. As we've seen in a few other cases, the storyline is rather one-dimensional in MK9. She's a glorified henchman and remained a protector for Sindel until her death. She then continued serving Shao as his jailer. Shiva ultimately becomes queen of the Shokan in the MKX comics and shows some heart despite being a fearless leader for their race. She returns in MK11 where she's still queen of the Shokan but remains neutral in the Shao-Kotal conflict. She eventually sides with Kotal, Katana, and the Tarkatans to fight Shao Kahn, and, like all of us, she's shocked to learn that Sindel was evil. All in all, Shiva's actually pretty good despite always seemingly leaning evil. I'm gonna put her in just kinda evil.
Your plan worked to perfection, Lord Shinnok.
Shinnok.
You know, it's a shame Shinnok has such a low success rate as a villain because his motivations are arguably the darkest of all the boss characters. In his second ever appearance, he challenges the Elder Gods and Raiden for banishing him to the Netherrealm, where he spent years upon years upon years. His numerous failures aside, because I can't stress that enough, Shinnok offers this Emperor Palpatine-like presence. As the fallen Elder God, his desire for vengeance drives him. We've seen this aspect of him in every one of his appearances, apart from MK Armageddon, where I suppose he's a bit more toned down. Even so, Shinnok always has a plan. I somewhat equate him to Shang Tsung in the way that he moves, scheming behind people's backs and having others do his bidding. A good example is how he manages to pull strings to weaken Earthrealm and Outworld to make the two realms more susceptible to the Netherrealm invasion. That was the grander scheme all along in MK9 when you think about it. If anything, I kind of feel MK11 slightly nerfed Shinnok's overall evil level. Him being Kronika's son, while strange without question, made it seem like Kronika brought him into the world for this one purpose. In that sense, he doesn't have the same natural evil that we've come to expect. Either way, invading Edenia, challenging the Elder Gods, conning Taven, and everything from the MK9 epilogue through the end of MKX embodies Shinnok's relentless villainy. His accomplishments, or a lack thereof, can't take away from this evil SOB. What more is there to say?
Deceived. I was the fool who brought him this power. Only I can destroy this threat, born of deception.
We've touched on a few real pure souls in this video, and Shujinko is amongst the purest. No question in my mind. I could honestly repeat everything I said about Onaga and move on. Whether you want to call him stupid or not, don't call him stupid. Shujinko blindly followed Onaga disguised as Damashi for literal decades of his life, thinking he was in pursuit of greatness. I guess he kind of got there, but there's nothing more tragic than this relationship. As Shujinko in Conquest, you can run around and aimlessly punch people. That's a reflection on you, not Shujinko. You could theoretically say it's evil how he never smartened up or thought to ask anyone about Damashi and what assembling the Kamidogu could lead to power-wise, but Shujinko is an angel. Did he help some villains along the way? Yes, but I won't hear anything otherwise on this.
Too bad you will die.
I've covered Sindel's many storylines extensively on this channel to the point where I don't know what more I can add. In general, Sindel's always been good except for that one outlier in that one expansion of that one game that I'd say 90+% of MK fans absolutely despise. Now, I know this isn't a video about what's good and what isn't, but Sindel's evilness in MK11 Aftermath was a sight to see. She and Shao Kahn inflicted more damage here than some villains have in the entire series. However, as I said, it was a small drop in the ocean compared to Sindel being mind-controlled or corrupted by the many evil forces that be. It's difficult for me to sit here and say that Sindel's a saint, considering she cleaned house in MK9 and MK11 Aftermath. But she was basically a revenant for the MK9 and MKX stuff and a different character entirely in Aftermath. I'm gonna slide Sindel into kinda evil, although I will say I strongly considered evil just because of those two major occurrences. Let me know where you would have put her.
Fright Night.
Unfortunately, Scarlet is one of the few characters with such a limited history. That doesn't mean a whole lot here though, because she's a straightforward villain. Nothing ambiguous about it. Now, she technically has two origins. Either she was created from the blood of Shao Kahn's defeated opponents, or she was an orphan trained by Shao Kahn in the arts of blood magic. Either way, it ain't great. I've always seen Scarlet as a female Ermac of sorts, but Scarlet seems to be sentient, if that makes sense. So, by that, I'm more than willing to say she's in full control of the many evil acts she's committed. In summary, Scarlet is evil, but I don't think she's of the demon caliber.
Where there is smoke, there is fire.
Smoke's a lot like Cyrax in the sense that he spent some time as a human but ultimately became an evil cyborg, but not by his own choice. Again, I have to mention that he's Lin Kuei, meaning he's an assassin, so not the most righteous as we've discussed at length. In the original timeline, he was basically thrown around, forced into the Cyber Initiative and to pair up with Noob Saibot. It's similar in the second timeline sans the cyber part. He instead becomes a dreaded revenant, assuming the classic Anenra identity, which I thought was cool.
Smoke. Smoke is dead. I am Anenra.
He then inexplicably disappeared until MK1, where he's a good boy named Tomas Verbata again. I'm just gonna say kinda evil because assassin. Also, he mistook Melina for Kitana.
Kitana turns away from Shao Kahn, so you attack her rather than join her?
This is not
Smoke, stop! That is not Katana.
What? And he blew up the world. But mainly the assassin thing.
Sonya Blade.
No.
At this point, however long we're into this video, I think we've learned that there's a clear difference between evil and just making poor choices. I don't think I can really call any of the bad things that Sonya's done in this series as evil. The two that stick out happened in the NRS era, one being Sonya constantly choosing work and the Special Forces over Johnny and Cassie. Not necessarily evil, but maybe more of a poor character trait. There's also this moment where past Sonya blames Cassie for her death without understanding what actually happened.
You left me behind?
Excuse me?
My final mission.
How did you...
That caught me off guard quite a bit, but again, not really evil per se. Then again, there is this whole Taven fiasco from Armageddon.
Now answer me. What is Sector planning? You're hiding something. Comply or I'll be forced to bring you in for further questioning.
I'm the son of Argus. You have no authority over me.
I have full authority.
That was kind of weird. Her being a soldier and all, it's difficult for me to say definitively that she's never done a bad thing, but I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. That kinda makes sense to me.
The pride of New York.
Curtis P. Stryker is one of those characters who is relatively memorable, but What? Oh, what's the P stand for? Well, it's either police officer or punches Melina? Where was I? Oh, but definitely not for his story. This guy is a generic police officer whose loyalties are as clear as day. He's loyal to the badge and probably protecting and serving, maybe. There's unfortunately not much to say here. He's a hero outside of socking Mileena in the face, which is just some demon shit. MK9 is pretty similar. He fights for Earthrealm before dying, becoming a revenant, and never appearing again. In canon, at least. I can't speak to his track record as a member of law enforcement, but as far as I'm concerned, never done a bad thing. Even though this is one of his coined phrases.
Police brutality coming up!
Bi-Han?
Yes, Kuai Liang.
Kuai Liang. Is that you? You look so old. Goodbye, Kuai Liang.
It is not the end.
Well, first and foremost, there's this. But I think Kuai Liang is one of the lesser evil Lin Kuei. For the 50th and hopefully the final time, I have to mention the baseline of this being a clan of assassins. Whether we see it or not, the safest assumption is that Kuai Liang has probably taken a few lives here and there, some of them probably innocent. I can't say for sure, but he was likely part of the Lin Kuei of his own volition. Even I can't defend him against that. Getting more specific though, I've seen some arguments that Kuai Liang betrayed his brother and basically forgot about him after he became Noob Saibot. I'm not really sure where I stand on this. He doesn't really show any interest in saving his brother who died unjustly and fell victim to further Quan Chi corruption.
Quan Chi has perfected me.
For what end? To serve the Netherrealm and Outworld?
It suits my purpose.
But brother,
we share blood. We are not brothers.
He does at least avenge his brother's death, in MK9 at least, but doesn't really care to save Bi-Han after the fact. There's also an argument about how he trained Frost and her ensuing attitude, but I wouldn't place all the blame on him for that for obvious reasons. And then there's this in MK9.
Possible.
I must go to the Colosseum.
But I need your help to get
There's a portal to the south. You can use it to transport yourselves back to Earthrealm.
Mother.
I guess that's why they call him Sub-Zero. I don't think there's a better spot than Kinda Evil for Kuai Liang. He's a good guy, but has some shady marks on his record.
Takeda.
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 Takeda. Takeda.
Despite a suboptimal upbringing without a father, I'd say Takeda or Takeda. Let me know how you say it because honestly, I have no idea. The announcer in MKX and MK1 pronounce it differently. Turned out just fine, all things considered. In MKX, he's part of the Combat Kids and the Special Forces who ultimately helped bring an end to Shinnok's attempted invasion. I'd say we know slightly less about him now since he was a DLC character in MK1 with no real involvement in the main story, but he's still a good guy overall. Now Kenchi's cousin rather than his son, the two came up in the Yakuza. Takeda, however, enjoyed his time while Kenchi wanted out. This led the Yakuza to put a hit out on Kenchi, but Takeda failed the mission and it took extensive convincing to turn him against the group. He then learned of the Red Dragon's existence, which we can assume will be his focus moving forward. Considering how I handled Kenchi, it only makes sense to put Takeda in Kinda Evil because of MK1.
Traitor!
The habitual Edenian traitor. Tanya was about as bad as you could possibly imagine until just recently. While maybe not single-handedly, she played a sizable role in Shinnok and Quan Chi invading Edenia. That was the catalyst for MK4. This act alone in a vacuum, regardless of anything she did in her last appearance, has to place her in evil at the bare minimum. She later becomes a quote-unquote ambassador for the Deadly Alliance, she serves Onaga and Empress Mileena. It really doesn't get much worse than that from an affiliation standpoint. Her lone appearance in the NRS era isn't any better either, as she remains aligned with the former Empress Mileena and Rain. All three of them opposed Kotal, who I think at this point we could say was a better option for Outworld than Mileena. I do think she's slightly less evil in MKX, and moving to MK1, she's one of the few characters who experienced a complete overhaul. She's just not bad whatsoever in this game, nor is her Chaos Reigns Empress variant. Don't get me wrong, Tanya did spend the vast majority of her time in the series on the evil side, and if it weren't for MK1, she'd go right to the top. But I'm gonna put her in very evil.
I figured you would eventually come to this place, Taven.
The Lin Kuei owe you much, Taven. Taven.
We don't have to spend too much time on Taven because he's basically Shujinko, but just in Armageddon. He doesn't have as much depth, but he drops into this world knowing almost nothing about it given his extended hibernation, so to speak. Anything even remotely evil Taven may have done was done without intent. For example, fighting these illusions for Shinnok's benefit. I think he's amongst the purest characters, even if he somehow did get destroyed by some combination of Shao Kahn and Blaze. Taven is an angel.
Earthquake!
Your death will satisfy my rage.
Tremor is pretty clearly a villain, but what sucks is we have so little actual lore for this character. At the very least, he is or was a member of the Black Dragon, and we've seen where those members have landed. Midway and NRS proceeded to do essentially nothing with this incredible character. He did appear in MKX, but that's pretty much non-canon by all accounts, and same for MK1. Although he did get a small run in the MKX comics, but it's really nothing special. He's still Black Dragon affiliated, and that's about it. I think it's only fair to put Tremor on the same level as his Black Dragon friends. Please give us more Tremor.
Triborg. I am Triborg.
This is kind of a weird way to conclude this list of characters since Triborg isn't canon, but this is such a sick concept. Basically Robo-Chameleon. Either way, based on everything we've seen, this is basically Skynet personified into one robot. I don't have much to add on that, and despite his lack of a rap sheet, Triborg belongs right at the top. I just know nothing good could possibly come from this character. That covers where I believe all 80 Mortal Kombat characters rank on this evil scale. Here's one final look at the list. Now it's time to decide who is the most evil. As you might expect, this comes down to the big bad bosses who have inflicted the most damage, ruined the most lives, affected multiple timelines negatively, and have had the fewest redeeming qualities or none at all. On that note, we could safely eliminate everything below Devil tier, and I really do think it comes down to Shinnok, Shang Tsung, and Quan Chi. Much love to Shao Kahn, but he's been a softie a few too many times for my liking, and by that I mean twice. As for the Dragon King, he just hasn't appeared enough, but he has serious potential. I think these three have made a case for the most evil. And keep in mind, this comes down to overall evilness with a heavy emphasis on accomplishments. Conceptually and motivation-wise, I think Shinnok could be number one with a bullet. This guy only wants death and destruction, but unfortunately he failed every single time. Plus, the whole Kronika thing kinda nerfed him in my eyes. My belief is that Shang Tsung should take the number one spot as not only the most evil, but also the most successful villain. This was honestly very much up in the air until MK11 Aftermath, where both endings are true. Meaning there's a universe out there where Shang is the Keeper of Time and he has his minions taking over all realms. That is a truly terrifying prospect. Don't get me wrong, he took plenty of L's pre-Aftermath, but he is one of the few who can say he took down the reigning MK champion. That is Shang in a nutshell. He's consistently evil and we've seen so much of him where his stance and goals have never wavered. No matter the timeline, Shang is front and center more often than not in the never-ending fight against good. Also, shout out Quan Chi. This dude has accomplished a lot in this series, but I just think he's a half step below Shang.
It has begun.
Well, that's it. My take on the evilness of every Mortal Kombat character ever. For the most part. Now's your time to let me know what I got right, what I got wrong. If there's some devious deeds that I missed along the way, be sure to let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. If you managed to make it this far, you're a real one, and you can let me know you're a real one by commenting,
"You're weak, Thunder God."
You know, for science. If you're interested in further supporting the channel, I do have channel memberships turned on, but obviously no pressure. But it is the best way to support me beyond just watching the videos. Either way, I appreciate you. Also, feel free to hype the video up on mobile if you feel like it. I really don't know what it does, but yeah. I hope you enjoyed your stay, and as always, until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll be back with another video soon.